this is Scott McDonald of DrDemographics.com. Now, you may think, my goodness, what do I need a demographer for? Well, you kind of want to have a demographer to help figure out if the place that you want to move is viable and if the people you want to serve are likely in, well, the market for a new doctor or for an old doctor or for a doctor who looks like them. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that, frankly, is going to get me in huge trouble, and I hope you'll forgive me, but I do want to be a little entertaining and informative. We're going to deal with some statistics that are right now in the news, and these are issues that people are sort of freaking out about, and I thought might be a good idea. No, we're not going to be talking about Afghanistan today, although if you wanted to, I guess we could. Anyway, the point that I'm really making is there are lots of very interesting things going on in the news regarding demographics. Now, the big news this week was the Census Bureau released a preliminary report to say, oh my gosh, the white population is shrinking in size compared to all the other ethnic groups and racial groups in the United States. There is a little more to this story and a little less to this story than you might know. Now, for those people who are trying to figure out, is this the right place to go, or is this going to be a viable place for me to consider a practice? Yeah, race is important, but so is ethnicity, and so are other demographic factors that you should be aware of. Now, I hope you don't mind. I've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right into this, and I think it's going to be useful for you to know. Now, that being said, let's kind of keep racial demographics. When I say that, I mean, I saw a lady on the news who was just absolutely beside herself, glee, suggesting that the white population is going down. Well, that's not entirely true, and it's not entirely true the reason she was thinking. In fact, she was saying, we're finally going to have our way because there are not as many white people in the world, and she definitely had a racial animus. That's rather unfortunate. It's unfortunate because race is not what people think it is. Ethnicity is not exactly what people think it is. So let me explain. Now, DrDemographics.com is all about knowing where to move, start a business, a practice, promote your efforts, and get the most out of your location. Our job is to help you know the where issues. And frankly, race and ethnicity happen to be a couple of those factors. Now, the simple fact is, in healthcare demographics, there are some things that people really kind of need to deal with. One is the teeth, eyes, bones, joints, and even your pets' physical characteristics don't really vary based upon race. They'll vary based upon age. The conditions that you get into may have some differences based on psychographics, but in the reality is race is only a factor, and it's not a big factor regarding what makes one area more desirable than another. If we were to go back to only one of those factors that I talked about, age is by far more important than race. However, some people get caught up in the idea of culture as being a major imperative for why one location is going to be good for another. There is a city in Southern California that has a significant number of Armenians. Knowing that the Armenians are a large central thing, one might assume that being an Armenian doctor might give you access to that population with the race and culture, religion, and other factors. And that is true, in fact. So I don't want to suggest you don't need to know it, but I'm going to say it's not going to be as determinative as other factors are in the determination of whether one location is good or bad compared to another. Now, human actions and their preferences are really what matter. Meaning, in other words, race, yeah, that can be kind of important, but really more important is, are you going to the same church as people who are local? Do you speak the same language that is dominant within your neighborhood? Are there customs and traditions that are going to really influence where people might want to go? And the answer is, yeah, there are. So don't get all caught up in the idea of how you look or what ethnic group or racial group you belong to is going to make that the only significant factor. Now, everybody, I'm going to explain something to you. I want you to pay attention to you and might want to write this word down if you don't know it. Phrenology. Phrenology is a rejected science. What's phrenology? There was a time in which people used to measure the bumps on your head to determine what kind of a person you were. Are you of the criminal class? Are you brilliant? Are you moving up? Are you doing other things? They would look at the shape and size of your head. Now, of course, you kind of look at it now as scientists and you think that's a little crazy. Nevertheless, it was a very big deal for a while. There's a fellow named Franz Joseph Gall came up with a thing called organology, the study of the aspects of the glands and organs in your body, which were supposed to determine the likelihood of particular actions. Now, we all understand that's stupid, don't we? Now, character is not determined by physical characteristics like your brain size. Some people think that the size of certain organs will make you better or worse as a companion in life. I won't go into beyond that, except to say it's kind of been disproven. Now, the Nazis and the socialists, and I'm talking about Stalin's research institutes, had a philosophy, and it has since been debunked. Now, keep in mind, the Nazis went through and measured the prisoners they had, the Jews, the Poles, the Slavs, to try to say that there's an advantage that we have over these people. Look, you guys, it isn't true. The difference between one race and another race are relatively small if you're looking at them on the mean statistics. So let's put that aside. It's not important. Now, language, country of origin, culture, little difference. But just keep this in mind. There is no such thing as racial determinism, that just because you belong to a given race, you're good or bad. Now, here's the problem. Critical race theory is a big deal right now. They're preaching it in schools, especially in colleges, and trying to suggest that because people have a particular race, the likelihood that they're going to have a philosophy or a point of view or be racist or not, they somehow are trying to say this is a big deal. Well, everybody, in case you haven't caught on, it's been debunked. It's not true. Now, there are differences between different races, but the differences as they apply to how people behave and what they value and what they want, no, it's not there. So, no, just because you have skin of a certain color doesn't mean you're automatically racist. I hope all of you are understanding of that point. Now, let's talk about the race in the news. There are all kinds of predictions that are out there regarding race that are wrong. They are dead wrong. They're going to hurt your practice. They're going to hurt your assumptions about people. So I want to deal with that today. Some people have the idea that jobs are going to be returning to the big cities now that the pandemic vaccines are out. They get the idea that, all the places that people were living before are going to be the best places to go. And here's the thing, it's kind of a myth. Now, big city mayors are the ones who are really promoting this. They're trying to say, oh no, Chicago is definitely coming back. But the truth is, so many people have left Chicago that it is strong indications exist that it's not going to happen, not going to change again. Now, you may say, what does that have to do with race? Some people associate where people of a particular race or ethnic group live as being good or bad based solely on the fact that these people are of a particular race or ethnic group. That isn't true. There are some parts of the United States that are represented by one particular group, and they're not doing as well as other places that these people of the ethnic group are doing. That's the important takeaway. But residents and jobs are not necessarily going to return to the big cities. There are lots of reasons why. Now, whites have declined in the United States, and here's the big news, 8.9% since 2010 to only 235.4 million. Now, white is by far the largest racial group in the United States, by far. They have declined somewhat, 8.9%. You may say, why? Well, whites aren't having children at the same rate that they used to. But then again, neither are most of the other racial groups in the United States. There was a time in which the birth rate per Hispanic woman was about 8. Now it's about 2.9. So that has changed a lot in a fairly narrow period of time. But the idea that whites have gone down by their numbers, it's a fact, it's true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that practices are going to do better or worse in those locations. I'll tell you the group that is growing fastest in the United States, the biggest racial change has been 2 or more races. Now, that's actually something you can hang your hat on. Population grew by 276% over the last 10 years in the 2 or more race category. Now, what that means is people are marrying people of other races. It's a fact. So is that matter? Should that matter? Well, the reality is it probably won't even be noticeable to most of you. Now, it went from 9 million in 2010 to 33.8 million in 2020. That just means a lot of people are marrying people outside of their race. Now, if you're a racist purist, that may or may not be a big deal to you, but it is true in every racial group. They're tending to marry most often. One of the groups that is marrying most often, intermarrying, are Asian women and white men. What? Yeah, and that's just a fact. You can determine why it is. I don't know, but I'm just saying it's a fact. Now, ultimately, remember this. The term white is being redefined in our population. Now, some people don't recognize that as a truth, but there was a time in which every Hispanic wanted to say, I'm white. They wouldn't say, I'm Hispanic. So when you were doing surveys among Hispanics and they were to ask your racial group, people used to say, I'm white. Now they're saying, I'm Hispanic. But remember, Hispanic is, well, there are a lot more Hispanics than they were previously, no matter how you define them in the United States. But Hispanic is only a loosely defined term. Remember, you can be Hispanic of any race, including Native American or Black or any of the above, mixed race included. Hispanic is an ethnic term, not a racial term. Because it's an ethnicity, how you define that ethnic group matters a lot. There are some Hispanics in the United States that have no association with Spanish at all. And because of that, it's a little confusing for people. You don't speak Spanish? No. I had a very good friend named David Salcido from Texas. He spoke no Spanish at all. And this was very confusing when we were both missionaries in El Salvador. People would come up and start spouting out in Spanish, and he was, well, a little confused. So the Hispanic population is far from monolithic, just like the white population is far from monolithic. By the way, just a little statistic. Back in the 1920s and 30s in the United States, if you were from Southern Europe, meaning Spain, Italy, Albania, you were not considered white. You were considered Southern Mediterranean. You had that darker skin. It mattered a lot to people back then. Right now, what? Does that matter if you're Greek or not? Well, anyway, much more productive, in fact, is to consider the country or origin or the language that is spoken at home. So if somebody says to me, do you think that my practice will do well in this area? I always say, okay, where is your family from? And do you speak a language other than English in your home? If you do, it may or may not benefit you. Politics and money are behind what's the news in race. There are a lot of people who are going out there and saying, oh, well, finally, we ought to have voting districts that are more reflective of race. But the point is, people don't always vote based upon their race or their country of origin or even their language group. It is not a simple issue, but there are people who want it to be, and they're trying to force money in politics to try to say, oh, people should be like me or like us. This is a very complicated issue because demographers know that African Americans, and we all know African Americans, a significant number of them have a white ancestor within the last 4 generations. The mixing of the races has been going on for a long time, and it has left us with the idea that maybe race isn't as important as it used to be. So ultimately, race-related news is not particularly impressive, and it's not particularly important how we live day to day. I will bet most of you doctors have got a good friend who is of a different race, and you don't even recognize their race. You don't care. Blacks and Hispanics, by the way, just in case you're wondering, are moving up and moving out of their traditional neighborhoods. They're not sticking to these stereotypes with which they used to live. Now, I say this because it used to be a time in which no one would ever think to marry outside of their particular race, especially if you're Hispanic. Come on, a Hispanic in the family? Well, you remember All in the Family, perhaps, and it made a big difference at the time. Right now, nobody cares. Nobody. And the same thing is generally true about African Americans. Now, everybody knows that Barack Obama, former president of the United States, his father was from Africa and his mother was American, and she was white. Did you care? Well, no, he really didn't wear it like a medal around his neck to identify who he was. It was an aspect of him, just like it is most people, especially people who are educated. Now, the stories, on the other hand, of Asian increases are generally not covered in the news. At this moment in time, people kind of don't want to deal with the issue that Asians, as a group, as a point of origin, they're doing very well on entrance exams in universities. The kids are doing very well when they graduate and taking high wage jobs. That does not go along with the political narrative that some people want. If you were to say, oh, well, this person's from China and that person's from India and this person's from Indonesia, they're all Asian, but they all have different language groups. If we talked about India alone, the number of Asian languages covered in India is huge. The number of Asian languages covered in China is significant as well. And I'm not going to go into all those now, but it's unwise to make broad generalities about it. So if you happen to be in a mixed race marriage and you were to say, is this going to be a good place for us to go or not? Are our kids going to be advantaged or disadvantages? I can tell you based upon ethnology charts, but it is not an absolute perfect measurement. All right. America is changing, its values are changing, and people are not doing quite what they used to do. The biggest news is that mixed race and mixed culture families are really changing. There was a time in which if you were Mexican American and you were from Chiapas, you probably wouldn't want to marry somebody from Chihuahua. You know the difference? Well, most Americans don't. But what part of Mexico you came from used to matter a lot. Not so much anymore. In that way, mixed culture families are becoming a much bigger thing than just mixed race families. Yes, I know I come from a mixed ethnic family because my mother was Swedish and my father was Scots. Big deal, I don't care. And I don't know if most people do. The big news is the stereotypes that are identified by race and by ethnology or ethnic group are falling apart. People just aren't doing voting or spending money or getting into professions like they used to. The biggest news of all is that people don't care. Ultimately, the whole idea race baiters have about dividing us by race, by ethnicity, isn't working anymore. And I think within a generation, it'll be gone. Now, let's talk about non-white doctors. Okay. Non-white doctors used to be rare. They're not anymore. I speak at all kinds of dental and medical schools all over the country, and I'm going to tell you, they don't care. Many are coming from a different culture or different countries. Do they care? Not so much. The race advantage that white doctors used to have is kind of leaving quickly. Other ethnic things matter much more, like, are you able to speak English without an accent? Are you a good communicator with people? And are you a good dresser? And do you have good hair? Now, believe it or not, on polls, that matters more. Language, culture, religion, country of origin, that still matters somewhat, but even then, those factors are changing. And I mentioned this thing about religion. There are a lot of different religions in the world. A lot of people are non-religious, or the religiosity factor is lower. Did you know that we can track that? And if you happen to be of a particular religion, it may be a bigger factor for you to know than, country of origin or race or ethnicity. I'm just saying. Now, look, at Dr. Demographics, we have just a boatload of data. And I am always happy to talk to you about the implications of what that data will have. You can call us at 833-424-6222, or just enter drdemographics.com, and we have all kinds of reports and also lectures, including information about how the implications of race, ethnicity, culture, countries of origin will matter. If it's of concern to you, however, let's talk. And sometimes a telephone consultation or a practice site viability report would be a good option for you. Dr. Demographics is here for you to find the perfect place to put a practice and to have success. And I want to thank all of you for watching. Take care.